You don't get a say, Eleanor. This isn't your home anymore. That's what Claire whispered, not yelled, whispered, on a Tuesday evening, while holding a tape measure in one hand and a roll of masking tape in the other. She was standing in my old study, what used to be my writing room, sectioning it off with lines like a crime scene. The books were gone. The desk I had carved initials into gone. The bay window chair where I used to drink tea while the magnolia tree outside bloomed in spring, replaced with two unopened boxes labeled Nursery, June. The baby isn't due for 5 more months. I stood in the doorway, silent, invisible. My son Thomas walked in behind me, arms full of paint samples. It's going to be soft sage, he said cheerfully.
Calming.
Gender neutral. Claire didn't even look at me when she added, "We'll need the room cleared by Friday." And just like that, I had been moved out of the last corner of my house. My name is Eleanor Shaw. I am 68 years old, a retired children's author, a mother, a widow, and, apparently, an unwanted guest in my own home. 3 months ago, I handed the keys to this place over to my son and his wife. It was meant to be temporary, just until the renovations on their new house were finished. A pipe burst, then mold was discovered in the walls, and insurance delays stretched their timeline from a few weeks to probably next spring. I'd offered my home without hesitation. The house I built with Malcolm, my late husband. The house we filled with bookcases, Sunday brunches, and laughter that used to echo from the stairwell to the sunroom. But somehow, along the way, my generosity became permission. And then permission became erasure. At first, it was subtle. Claire rearranged the living room to make room for the stroller. She boxed up the family photos in the hallway, just for a clean look. Then one day, my favorite tea tins vanished from the pantry. A week later, the kitchen radio I used every morning accidentally fell while she was wiping down the counters. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to seem petty. I told myself she was nesting. Hormonal.
Stressed.
But the night they moved my writing desk without asking, the desk Malcolm built by hand as a retirement gift, the desk where every one of my books began, I felt something inside me fracture. Quietly, like a seam pulled too tight. I had spent my life creating characters who found their voice. And yet, here I was, voiceless in the home I once designed down to the light switches. Thomas had always been gentle. He was my miracle baby, born after 4 miscarriages. He used to follow me around with a pencil and sketchbook, drawing animals he'd seen in his dreams. He once cried when I replaced his favorite cereal brand.
And now?
Now he let his wife call my house the temporary setup while he nodded along, flipping through crib catalogs. They didn't ask if I was okay sharing the space. They didn't ask if I minded the baby's things lining the hallway. And they certainly didn't ask before they painted over Malcolm's mural in the garage. I sat on the edge of my bed, what used to be the master bedroom and was now dubbed Grandma's Corner, and stared at the blank ceiling. I couldn't even hang pictures anymore. Claire had swapped out the hooks for safety reasons. For the first time since Malcolm's funeral, I felt truly alone. But grief is a peculiar teacher. It tells you that silence is survival, that accommodation is kindness, that invisibility keeps the peace. I had believed those lies for years. Until now. The next morning, I rose before dawn. The house was quiet. Claire had finally started sleeping later now that the nausea passed. I crept downstairs with a cup of weak tea and opened the drawer in the hallway table, the one Claire never used. Inside was the old manila folder, the one labeled Malcolm Legacy. I had forgotten it was even there. Inside were yellowing documents, rough sketches of a cabin, and a single, handwritten letter. If you're reading this, Elle, I'm gone. But the cabin's still yours. I kept it in your name, not mine. Just in case you ever need a place that's only yours again. I figured you might. Love always, Malcolm. I stared at that line, just in case you ever need a place that's only yours again, and something deep inside me stirred. Not anger, not revenge. Something older. Resolve. I made a list. I needed a survey.
A car.
Directions. A legal review. The cabin hadn't been touched in decades. It had no plumbing, no insulation, but it had a roof.
And a deed. And a view of the lake.
That afternoon, I sat at the kitchen island as Claire prepared her organic kale soup and Thomas unpacked a box of onesies. "Where's the desk?" I asked quietly. Claire didn't even look up. "Storage unit." Thomas glanced between us. "Is everything okay, Mom?" I smiled, that careful kind of smile you wear to funerals. "I'm going to be heading out soon. I've found another place to stay." Claire's spoon clattered into the pot. "Wait, what?" "It's been lovely having you," I said. "But this house isn't mine anymore." Thomas frowned. "Mom, we never meant for you to leave. You're family." I stood, walked to the pantry, and opened the door. The tea tins were back. Different labels. Neat rows. I chose the plain chamomile and turned to face them both. "I know I'm family, Thomas," I said gently. "That's why I'm leaving. Before you forget that." And I meant it, because sometimes the best way to remind people of your worth is to show them what your absence feels like. Before we continue, take a moment to let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to more powerful stories like this one. The tires crunched over gravel, a sound that struck like memory. I hadn't been here in nearly 22 years. The old sign was still half hanging from a rusted bracket nailed to the fence. "Whisper Pines, private property." Malcolm's idea of humor. He said the pines whispered secrets to those who stayed long enough to listen. I used to think it was sweet. Now I wondered if it was a warning. The cabin was smaller than I remembered. Gray wood, sagging porch, a patchy roof that looked like it had braved one too many winters without company. But it was mine. I stepped out of the car and let the air wash over me. Cold, crisp, and pine-drenched. The silence was different here, earned, not imposed. The kind of quiet that comes with solitude, not exclusion. Inside, it was exactly as I'd feared and hoped. Dust hung in slants of morning light. The furniture, all handmade, all splintered with time. A dead mouse in the corner. A pair of boots Malcolm left under the coat rack, hardened and cracked with age. They'd never been moved. I pressed a hand against the mantel, the stone fireplace still sturdy. I remember the night we laid the stones together, stacking them like puzzle pieces while he hummed under his breath, and I pretended not to hate the way my back ached. In the corner was the rocking chair, the same one I sat in while proofing my last manuscript. I let my hand trail across its arm and sat. It creaked, loudly, but it held. And so would I. Over the next week, I worked, not like I had back in the city, not for survival, not to please anyone. I worked because each nail I hammered, each floorboard I scrubbed, each rusted hinge I oiled reminded me I was capable. I cleaned. I patched the roof. I fixed the window that screeched when it opened. At the end of the third day, I called Cynthia. Cynthia Lowe, my attorney, who once told me after Malcolm's funeral that if I ever needed help sorting out the odds and ends of the estate, she'd be a phone call away. "Eleanor Shaw," she said when she picked up, her voice firm and familiar. "Haven't heard from you since 2005. How's retirement treating you?" "About as well as being evicted," with a smile. That got her attention. 10 minutes later, I had an appointment. The cabin may have been mine, but if I wanted to turn it into a home again, a legal residence, one that couldn't be touched or taken, I needed more than a memory and a ghost. I brought the folder, the deed, the note, the original blueprint sketch Malcolm had drawn on napkins over breakfast. Cynthia sat back in her chair, lips pursed, fingers steepled. "It's all in your name," she confirmed. "Fully transferred after Malcolm's passing. No liens, no restrictions. Technically off-grid, but zoned residential." She looked up. "So, what are you planning?" I leaned forward. "I want to live there. Not temporarily. Not until someone else decides it's inconvenient. I want to register it as my permanent address. I want this place off their radar, Cynthia." She smiled. "I assume they means Thomas and Claire." I nodded. She pulled out her pen. "Then let's make this official." By the end of the week, I'd opened a bank account in my own name, filed the change of address. Hired a local contractor who agreed to install a new septic tank and solar panels. No judgment, just a handshake and a quote. Everything was coming together. And yet, something gnawed at me. Not guilt. Not regret. A kind of sadness that settles in your bones when you realize a chapter has ended without anyone noticing the page had turned. On the 7th day, I returned to the city. Only for a visit. Only for closure. Claire was rearranging the living room again. I saw through the window before I rang the doorbell. This time, the couch had been angled toward the fireplace, away from the family photo wall, which, notably, no longer featured any pictures from before their wedding. Thomas answered, eyes wide with surprise. "Mom," I smiled gently. "May I come in?" Claire appeared behind him, arms crossed, but she didn't stop me. I walked inside slowly, absorbing the sterile smell of lavender and lemon-scented candles. Everything looked curated, minimalist, like a showroom for a life I didn't belong to. "I just came to collect the rest of my things," I said. "I thought we stored them," Claire replied. "I have a new address now. I need them." Thomas shifted awkwardly. "Where are you staying?" I met his eyes. "Somewhere you both forgot I owned." Claire frowned. "You mean the cabin? That place hasn't been used in years." "No," I said, walking past her toward the hall. "It hasn't been appreciated in years." Big difference. They followed me silently as I opened the closet, gathering my winter coat, Malcolm's chessboard, and a stack of old manuscripts Claire had once called outdated clutter. At the door, Thomas stepped forward. "Mom, are you really leaving?" "I already left," I said simply. "This is just the final sweep." Claire's voice rose slightly. "You can't be serious. That place doesn't even have internet." "It will," I replied. "And even if it didn't, silence doesn't scare me." She laughed once, bitter. "You're going to isolate yourself over a few paint swatches and furniture arrangements?" I turned to her, really looked at her. "No," I said. "I'm reclaiming a life where I am not edited out like an outdated chapter." Thomas looked down. Claire looked confused. I opened the door and paused. "I hope the nursery turns out just how you planned," I said. "But maybe don't teach her that love means obedience." Then I stepped out and shut the door behind me. Back in the cabin that night, I lit the fireplace for the first time in decades. The flames danced up the stones Malcolm laid by hand. The rocking chair creaked beside me. The air smelled of pine, dust, and courage. I was home, and no one could take that away again. It took less than a week before the call started. At first, they were short, hesitant.
"Hi, Mom."
"Just checking in. Are you comfortable out there?" That was Thomas on day 4. His voice carefully casual, like he was pretending we were just catching up, not trying to make sense of the fact that I'd quietly disappeared from their lives without making a scene. I told him I was doing well, that I'd found a carpenter named Ellis from the neighboring town who was helping me seal the windows, that I'd met a retired nurse named Marie who ran a local market out of her barn, that the local coffee shop made a terrible espresso, but I liked their cinnamon rolls. I didn't tell him how I cried the first night I slept there, not out of sadness, but because for the first time in years, I fell asleep in a house where no one sighed at my footsteps or rearranged the things I touched. Claire didn't call. Not once. But she sent a message through Thomas. "Claire says you left some of your things behind." I told him to donate them. If they didn't matter enough to ask me about when I was there, they didn't matter now. I got used to the quiet quicker than I expected. I started rising with the sun. I'd forgotten what it felt like to wake up without an alarm or a list of things someone else needed from me. I sat on the porch wrapped in Malcolm's old cardigan, watching mist rise from the lake like steam from a pot. The cabin creaked and moaned during the night, but it was honest about it. Unlike the house I left behind, where smiles were stiff and kindness was conditional. I took up writing again.
Just small things.
Observations. Letters I never intended to send. Recipes scrawled on napkins. Memories threaded into notebook margins. It was enough. Cynthia called the following week. "You're officially registered," she said. "Residence verified. Property taxes transferred." I also added your name to the county directory as a full-time occupant. No one can label you off-grid or vacant now. I smiled. Thank you. She hesitated. You're sure you don't want to list it? Even just to see the offers? I'm sure. You're sitting on a gold mine, Eleanor. You could name your price. I already have, I said softly.
Peace.
She chuckled. Fair enough. Then, on a gray Tuesday afternoon, a black SUV pulled into the gravel road. The kind of SUV that doesn't drive this far into the woods unless it has a reason. I watched from the porch. The man who stepped out was wearing a tailored jacket, a tablet tucked under one arm. He smiled as he approached, but it didn't reach his eyes. Miss Shaw, he asked. Yes. Eli Marston, with Silverstone Development. We're surveying the area for a potential eco-living community expansion, and we noticed your land sits right at the ridge. He held out a digital rendering, modern cabins, sleek glass, boardwalks along the water, all perfectly detached from the earth beneath them. We'd love to discuss a purchase. You wouldn't have to move. We could offer relocation or buy out your choice. And the offer would be generous. Very generous. I didn't even look at the tablet. Not interested, I said simply. His smile tightened. Are you sure? It would be a shame for this place to go to waste. I looked around at the porch, the garden sprouting in the corner, the bird feeder I had just refilled with sunflower seeds. It's not going to waste, I replied. It's going to me. He shifted on his feet. With respect, Miss Shaw, this kind of development brings opportunity.
Jobs.
Growth. Some things don't need to grow, I said. They just need to be left alone. He nodded curtly.
Well,
we'll be in touch. No, you won't, I said, and turned my back to him. 3 days later, Claire called. Not Thomas.
Claire.
It was the first time I'd heard her voice since I left. Hi, Eleanor, she began, overly polite. I heard someone from Silverstone reached out to you. They called me this morning because they couldn't get a hold of your business line. I don't have a business line. She paused. Right, of course. They're very interested in the area. And since Thomas and I are still listed under the mailing address. You're not, I said calmly. I had it changed. She ignored that. Anyway, I just thought you might not realize how valuable that land is. Especially since you're out there alone. I didn't answer right away. I let her fill the silence. I mean, think of the community. That land could fund a community center, scholarships. I heard something about a library annex. There it was. The play for nobility. The manipulation under a cloak of generosity. I smiled to myself. I'll think about it. Really, she said, surprised. No, I said and hung up. But now, I was on alert. I didn't trust them not to come again. I didn't trust Claire not to try something behind my back. So I went back to Cynthia. I want the property locked, I said. She raised an eyebrow. Legally? Every way possible. She pulled out forms. We can draft a covenant. You'll register this land as a protected personal homestead. No future subdivision. No development. Not even if you change your mind. I won't. She slid the forms across the table. This will make your property an island in a sea of corporate ambition, she warned. I smiled. Good. I signed. And just like that, the land stopped being a possibility to them. It became permanence for me. The next day, I planted flowers. Lavender. Rosemary. Peonies. Not because I had guests coming, but because I liked how they looked when they grew wild. I placed a weatherproof bench beneath the birch tree Malcolm had planted the summer after we bought the place. And then I sat there for hours, just watching the wind thread its way through the trees. I used to think legacy was what you left behind. Now I know, it's what you protect while you're still here. The letter arrived in a plain envelope. No logo. No return address. Just my name in black ink, typed, not handwritten, and my full address spelled out across the front like someone was trying to prove they'd found me. Inside, a single sheet. Eleanor Shaw. We are disappointed to hear of your recent decision to decline negotiations with Silverstone Development. However, we wish to extend a final opportunity to revisit the terms. Our partners have authorized an updated offer of $1.92 million for your parcel at Whisper Pines Ridge. This includes full relocation assistance, closing incentives, and a community donation in your name. Should you change your mind, we encourage you to contact our office directly before the 30th of this month. Respectfully, Marianne Coulter, Senior Acquisition Agent, Silverstone Development. The letter had no warmth, just the careful language of someone trained to sound kind while orchestrating a removal. I folded it once and fed it into the wood stove. The fire cracked as it caught. Claire must have escalated things. She hadn't called since our last conversation. But I knew her. She wasn't the type to accept no from someone she viewed as outdated. To her, my silence was just a challenge she hadn't solved yet. I had lived enough years to know the difference between distance and dismissal. What Claire didn't understand was that I hadn't retreated. I'd reclaimed. She saw my absence as surrender. She had no idea it was strategy. I spent the following Sunday preparing my garden beds. It had rained the night before, and the soil was soft, the kind that cradled roots instead of resisting them. I worked slowly, not because I was old, but because I'd learned to appreciate the quiet labor of care. Each rosemary sprig, each lavender bulb, a small declaration. This land is mine, and I'm staying. Midday, I heard a car pull up. Not the kind that brings trouble, no tinted windows or tailored suits. Just a battered blue Honda with one foggy headlight. Thomas. He stepped out slowly, hands in his jacket pockets, like he was walking into a place he wasn't sure he had the right to be in anymore. I didn't meet him at the car. I let him come to me. "Hey, Mom," he said, offering a small, cautious smile. "Hey," I replied, wiping my hands on a towel. I was in town, thought I'd stop by. I tilted my head. In town for what? He hesitated. Claire had a meeting with a Silverstone partner. There it was. Did she send you? He shook his head quickly.
No.
Actually, I don't think she even knows I'm here. That surprised me. He looked around, eyes resting on the half-built trellis by the shed, the newly planted herbs, the faint line of smoke from the chimney. You did all this yourself? Most of it, I said. Ellis comes by once a week to help with the heavy lifting. Looks peaceful. It is. He kicked at a stone. Claire says you're being stubborn. I met his eyes. And what do you say? He sighed, looking older than I remembered. I say you've earned the right to be. I nodded once, then turned back to the soil. He stood in silence for a while. I saw the new deed registration, he said quietly. The covenant. No resale. No development. Claire was furious. That wasn't the point, I replied. What was the point? I leaned back on my heels, stretching. The point was to live in a space where I'm not someone's temporary inconvenience. He sat on the edge of the bench, elbows on knees. You really think we saw you that way? I know Claire did.
He didn't argue.
And you?
I asked.
Thomas was quiet. I think, he said slowly, I was so busy trying to keep things smooth between you two that I didn't see how far we'd pushed you out. I thought, I don't know, that you were just being quiet. I was, I said. But silence isn't always agreement. Sometimes it's exhaustion. He nodded, his gaze dropping to the garden. I used to sit in that chair, he said, pointing toward the porch. Reading Hardy Boys. You'd bring me hot cocoa. I remember, I said softly.
He looked up at me then.
Really looked. I miss that. I miss you. I stood, wiped the dirt from my palms again, and walked over. Then come visit, I said. Just don't bring expectations. This place isn't for managing. It's for being. He gave a small smile. I offered him the trowel. He blinked. Seriously? Get your hands dirty, Thomas. He knelt next to me. Together, we planted the rest of the rosemary. That evening, he stayed for dinner. I made vegetable stew and cornbread. Nothing fancy. Just real food. The kind that fills a house with a scent so honest it can't be faked. We didn't talk about Claire much. We didn't talk about the baby or the nursery or the guest room that used to be mine. We talked about books. About the way the magnolia tree bloomed too early that spring. About Malcolm's ridiculous habit of singing 60s folk songs off-key while chopping firewood. When he left, he hugged me tighter than he had in years. "I'll come back soon," he said. "You're always welcome," I replied. And I meant it. 3 days later, I found a small package on my porch, wrapped in brown paper, tied with string. No note. Inside, my old writing desk key. The one Claire had said was probably lost in the move. I turned it over in my hand, the brass warm from the sun. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. And that something was enough. It rained for 3 days straight. The kind of rain that soaks into the wood and hums against the roof, like an old lullaby. Some might have called it dreary, isolating, but to me, it felt like a reset. A washing away of the old. By the fourth morning, the clouds had broken, and the air was crisp, cool, alive. I stepped out barefoot onto the damp porch, tea in hand, and watched the light creep through the birch trees like gold spilled across the forest floor. My rosemary sprigs stood a little taller, the soil around them dark and generous. In the distance, I could see the edge of the lake, still as glass, reflecting the sky like a secret mirror. This land had stopped being a memory. It had become a declaration. I wasn't retreating. I was rooting. The mail carrier, a young woman named Marla, had started lingering a little longer during deliveries. She claimed her truck needed a moment to rest before driving the steep incline back toward the main road. I didn't mind. Marla brought news from town, quiet things. Who was selling their property? Which kids had left for college? Who'd returned home after a divorce? "You've got people talking," she said one afternoon, sipping the apple cider I'd offered. "Said you turned down $1 million deal like it was pocket change." I smiled into my mug. Wasn't about the money. She tilted her head. Then what? I looked around at the trees, the porch, the little raised bed garden beginning to bloom. It was about not being erased. She nodded slowly, like she understood more than she let on. Then she reached into her mailbag and pulled out a thick, white envelope. This came certified. Lawyer's stamp. Looks important. I recognized the return address instantly. Langley and Ward, LLP. Claire's firm. I stared at it without opening it. "I can come back," Marla offered gently. "No," I said. "Let's see what she's up to this time." I slit the top with my thumbnail. Inside was a formal request to reconsider the property covenant I had filed. Not from Claire directly, of course, but her fingerprints were all over the language. The phrasing was meant to sound like opportunity. "In light of potential community impact, we believe your decision may benefit from reevaluation. This parcel could serve as a vital asset in our expanded community initiative." The last line said everything. "Please respond within 10 business days to avoid escalation." I laughed. Escalation. I said aloud. Of what? Respect. Marla leaned forward. "You want me to spit on it for you?" I grinned. Tempting. Instead, I walked to the stove, flicked the burner, and lit the letter on fire. We watched in silence as it curled and blackened, flame licking the corners until it vanished entirely. "Better than spitting," I said. Marla raised her mug. "To boundary setting." I sent Cynthia the ashes in a small Ziploc bag with a note. "Please inform Claire's firm that I received their request and have responded accordingly. Yours always,
E. Shaw."
2 days later, Cynthia called laughing so hard she could barely get the words out. "They had the audacity to ask if you were mentally sound." "Let me guess," I said. "They're trying to open a case." "They wouldn't dare. I've already submitted medical clearance from your last appointment. And, get this, I included a copy of your recent land improvement invoices, a photo of your raised garden, and the preservation covenant stamped with your signature." I smiled. "You're enjoying this." She exhaled. "I really am." That night, I sat with my notebook open, the fire crackling beside me.
I wasn't writing a story this time.
I was writing a will, not because I was dying, no, but because I'd learned the hard way what happens when you leave too much unspoken. I wrote with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Each line a map for the future. The cabin would remain intact. The land preserved. The house entrusted to someone who would love it, not sell it. And above all else, I made one thing very clear. No portion of this estate shall be sold or subdivided for commercial development under any circumstance. This home was built for solitude, rebirth, and peace, not profit. I signed it with a steady hand, because they might come for me again. But this time, I wouldn't leave space for interpretation. A week passed before the next attempt. This time, it wasn't a letter or a legal form. It was Claire herself. I saw her silver car from the garden, winding up the road like a mirage I'd hoped I was done seeing. She stepped out wearing her usual armor, blazer, heels, perfect makeup. Her expression was unreadable. She walked slowly, like someone approaching a wild animal. Or maybe a landmine. I didn't meet her halfway. She came to me. "You've made yourself hard to reach," she said. "Intentionally," I replied. She looked around. "This place, it's more than I expected. Most things are, when you're not looking closely." She bristled, but said nothing. After a pause, she said, "You really won't sell?"
No.
Her voice tightened. "Even for the baby's future?" I looked at her, then really looked. "You want to raise your daughter on the belief that stealing someone else's peace is how progress works?" Her mouth opened.
Closed.
"I want her to see women like you," she said finally. "Strong, principled, respected." I raised a brow. "Funny. You didn't think I was strong when I lived under your roof."
Her voice faltered.
Maybe I couldn't see it then. Maybe I didn't want to. We stood in the quiet. I waited. Claire inhaled sharply. "I didn't come to fight. I came to ask a favor." "Go on." "Can we bring Sophie?" "Just to visit. She misses you."
Sophie.
The only softness left in that house. My throat tightened. I looked down at my dirt-stained gloves, the rosemary clippings in my palm. "Saturday," I said. "Bring her Saturday. But come as her mother, not as a representative of Langley and Ward." Claire nodded. Then she did something that surprised me. She extended her hand. I didn't take it. Not yet. When she left, I sat on the porch and watched the wind ripple through the trees. They had once expected me to disappear,
To shrink.
to fade. But I hadn't vanished. I had rooted myself so deeply they'd have to dig through stone to move me. And even then, I'd still grow back. Saturday came with sun. Not the harsh kind that exposes every crack and fault, but the kind that lingers gently, washes the trees in gold, and makes even old wood look warm. I stood in the kitchen, kneading bread dough, flour dusting my wrists, when I saw the car pull in. It was Claire's. But it wasn't just her. Sophie stepped out first, her hair longer than I remembered, a soft braid down her back, a tote bag slung over her shoulder. She looked like the in-between of childhood and womanhood. That tender, awkward place where everything still fits, but nothing feels like it does. Claire followed behind, subdued. No blazer. Just a cardigan and jeans. A calculated softness, but it was something. I opened the door before they could knock. Sophie grinned. "Grandma." She barreled toward me with a hug so fierce it startled the air from my lungs. Claire hung back on the porch. "You said noon," she murmured, not meeting my eye. "And you came at 11:30, I replied. "Some habits die hard." She smirked slightly. "Some don't die at all." Inside, Sophie wandered the cabin like it was a storybook, her fingers tracing the edges of the mantel, eyes landing on the pressed flowers framed in the hallway. "This place smells like books and cinnamon," she said. "It's the walls," I smiled. "They remember better things." She peeked into my writing room. "Can I see what you're working on?" I hesitated, then nodded. Inside, the desk was back in its rightful place. Claire's eyes fell on it. She stopped mid-step. "You kept it." I didn't answer. Sophie read the opening paragraph of a new story I'd begun, a children's tale about a girl who built a treehouse so high no one could reach her, unless she dropped the ladder.
She turned to me.
"Is the girl lonely up there?" "No," I said. She just got tired of being interrupted. Claire exhaled sharply. "Okay, that's a little on the nose." Sophie giggled. We made lunch together. Fresh bread, tomato soup, fruit salad with mint. Sophie chopped, Claire stirred, and I stood between them, silent, watching. For a moment, it almost looked like family. Real family. Not the kind where someone is tolerated, but the kind where presence is intentional. Over lunch, Claire barely spoke. But she watched. She watched Sophie listen to me explain how lavender can calm the nerves. She watched Sophie ask me how I wrote so many books without typing. She watched Sophie laugh, really laugh, for the first time in what felt like years. And I saw something shift behind Claire's eyes. Not jealousy. Not resentment. Regret. After the meal, I handed Sophie a small envelope. She opened it carefully. Inside, a set of pressed wildflowers, a note, and a worn brass key. She looked up confused. It's for the shed, I said. There's an old table in there. Malcolm used to build birdhouses on it. Can I? It's yours now. She beamed. Claire stood slowly, looking between us. She'll want to come back, she said quietly. She's welcome to, I replied. You too. If you come differently. Claire nodded, eyes glossy but holding firm. Can I ask you something? She said. Always. When did you know it was time to go? From our house. I set my mug down. When I realized I was being managed, not loved. Her breath caught, but she didn't argue. I thought I was doing you a favor, she admitted. Organizing, planning, making things simpler. I met her eyes. You were simplifying me out of my own life. Silence. Then Claire said something I never expected. I was terrified, Eleanor. Of the baby. Of failing. Of being seen as not enough. And when you were there, calm, experienced, I didn't feel grateful. I felt threatened. There it was. The truth we both danced around for years. I sat beside her. Not close, but not far. You weren't failing, I said. You were just forcing yourself to do it alone.
She turned to me.
And you? I was surviving. Until I remembered I didn't have to. Sophie ran in from the shed, a little dusty, a wild grin on her face. There's an owl carved into the back wall. I laughed. That was Malcolm's signature. He said owls keep watch even when no one notices. She hugged me again, harder this time. When I grow up, she said, I'm gonna live in a place just like this. I looked at Claire, and for the first time, she didn't flinch. I hope you do, I told Sophie. But I also hope no one makes you fight to keep it. They left just before sunset. Sophie waved from the window, the key glinting on a ribbon around her neck. Claire paused at the driver's side.
Thank you, she said.
For everything. I didn't say you're welcome. I said, just remember how it felt to be here. And teach her that feeling. Claire nodded, then added, she thinks you're magic, by the way. I smiled. Most people do. Until I stopped being quiet. That night, I sat on the porch, feet tucked under me, notebook open in my lap. Not to write, just to reflect. I had been silent for so long, I forgot what it felt like to take up space.
But now?
Now I didn't just take up space. I claimed it. Every inch of this land was written in the language of my survival. And for the first time, the people who once saw me as an extra finally saw me as essential. 2 weeks passed before I heard from them again. Not a phone call. Not an email. A postcard. One of those oversized novelty ones with a cartoon sun wearing sunglasses and the words, Baby Moon in Tucson, stamped across the front. Claire's handwriting was on the back. Surprisingly neat, sharp little loops and deliberate spacing. Eleanor. Arizona is hot, dry, and still somehow exactly what we needed. Thank you for your grace, your steadiness, and your space. Sophie talks about your cabin like it's a fairy tale. I suppose to her it is. We'll be back in town next month. She's begging to visit again. Let me know when's a good time.
Claire.
I held the card for a long time. The ink hadn't even fully dried before I turned it over, rereading her words. Not out of disbelief. Out of something much stranger. Healing. Because a year ago, Claire would have sent a legal notice before she sent a thank you. And now she was asking for a time that worked for me. I tacked the postcard to the corkboard in my kitchen beside Malcolm's old recipe for lemon ginger scones and the faded grocery list I couldn't throw away because it was the last one Sophie wrote when she was 6. Not everything needed to be framed. Some things just needed to be remembered. The next morning, I walked the perimeter of my land. It was something I'd started doing lately, not for safety but for intimacy. I knew this place better than anyone now, where the deer crossed at dawn, where the blackberry bushes bloomed too early, where the moss crept over the rocks like velvet if you waited long enough. Each step was a confirmation. This wasn't a temporary stop in someone else's journey. This was my legacy. At the far edge, past the birch line, I stopped at the boundary where my property met the state reserve. The path was muddy, waterlogged from the last storm, and littered with surveyor flags, new ones, bright orange. Someone was sniffing around again. I took a photo and sent it to Cynthia with a short message. "They're back. Quietly. Be ready." She responded in minutes, already drafting a cease and desist. "You're protected, Eleanor. Let them try." I smiled. Let them. That afternoon, a man knocked on my door. Not in a suit. This one wore flannel and boots. He had dirt on his jeans and a clipboard in his hand. "Ma'am," he said, nodding. "My name's Davis. I work with the county road and development team. I'm here doing a routine inspection on land access for the upcoming district map update." "Inspection?" I asked. "Yes, ma'am. Just charting the roads that may be eligible for private access rezoning if the county votes to approve expansion next year." He said it with a tone of someone trying to sound helpful while also hoping I wouldn't ask too many questions. I stepped out onto the porch, folded my arms. "And this rezoning, what does that mean for me?" He hesitated. "Well, if the vote passes, the county could potentially declare a need for shared access through private land. It wouldn't mean losing property, just granting an easement." "A foot in the door," I said plainly. He cleared his throat. "There would be compensation." I looked him dead in the eye. "You're here because someone told you to be." He blinked. I can't say. You don't have to. Claire sent you." His silence confirmed it. I stepped off the porch, walking right up to the edge of my gravel path. Then I stopped, pointed to the corner where the deed boundary marker still stood, freshly repainted, red and clear. "That's my line," I said. "This house, this land, is protected under a preservation covenant registered with the county. Any attempt to revise that without my approval is grounds for legal action." His face shifted. Respect, maybe, or fear. I smiled, calm, firm, unshaken. "Now," I said. "You want cider? Or are we done here?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am. I think we're done." "Good." He left without another word. That night, I wrote another letter. This one for Sophie. Dear Sophie. I saw some new flags in the woods today. Orange ones. They always show up when people forget to ask permission. Sometimes, you'll find people try to dress control as progress. They'll smile while they erase you. If there's one thing I hope you take from our time together, it's this. You don't owe anyone access to your peace. Not even when they say it's for the greater good. Build something no one can take. Love. Grandma L**. I sealed it, stamped it, and placed it beside her growing stack. One day, I'd give them all to her. She'd need them, especially if she ever learned to say no. The next morning, my phone rang. Thomas. I picked up, still wiping flour from my hands. "Hey, Mom," he said. "I heard Claire's firm made another move." "They tried," I said. "She sent a man in boots this time instead of heels." He sighed. "I didn't know." "I believe you." He paused. She's unraveling a bit. I think the control's slipping faster than she expected. And I think she knows she misjudged you." "I'm not here to be judged," I said gently. "Not by her. Not by anyone." "I know," he said. I guess I never realized how much you carried until you walked away." I softened. "It's easy to forget a foundation until the floor caves in, sweetheart." His voice caught. I'm sorry for letting it get that far. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Come by next week, I said. Bring Sophie. We'll plant more herbs. Teach her something useful. I'd like that, he said quietly. I know, I replied. Later that day, I returned to the birch line. The survey flags were gone.
Just like that.
And I knew what it meant. Claire was running out of moves. She'd tried kindness, strategy, manipulation, and pressure. None of it had worked. Because the thing she never understood was this. I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to live. And no one, not her, not a firm, not the county, was going to stop me from doing that. The house was quiet again. So quiet I could hear the wind tracing its fingers across the window panes. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my second cup of tea, watching the early sun spill across the floorboards. I didn't need anything from the day, not productivity, not validation. Just this moment, this silence. And then, the phone rang.
Not the landline, the cell phone.
The one I barely used, except for calls from Sophie. But it wasn't her. It was Thomas. He didn't waste time. She left me. I closed my eyes, held the cup a little tighter. Claire? He exhaled, long and unsteady. Took a hotel room. Says she needs space to think. Says she doesn't know who she is anymore. She told you that? More or less. It came after I told her I was done watching her treat people like chess pieces. Silence. She said I'd turned against her. That I chose you. I stayed quiet. Sometimes it's not the words you say, it's the silence you hold open. I didn't mean to choose anyone, he added. I started to see it. All of it. The control. The decisions made for me, not with me. I waited. He wasn't done. She's not a bad person, he whispered. She's just afraid of becoming small. And I think the only way she knows how to avoid that is by making other people feel smaller. My eyes flicked to the photograph on the fridge. Malcolm and me, arms wrapped around toddler Thomas, all cheeks and giggles and peanut butter smears. He used to think love meant noise. Now he was learning it meant space. Will you be okay? I asked softly. I don't know, he said. But I feel more like myself than I have in years. That night, I opened the box in the attic. The one I hadn't touched since Malcolm died. Inside were things no one would have deemed valuable, except me. His worn leather wallet. A mixtape we made on a whim during a rainstorm. Doodles from our road trip through the Carolinas. A faded receipt from a diner where he first told me he loved me. And at the bottom, folded neatly, a letter addressed to E. If you're alone, read this. I hadn't been ready. Not then. But now, with a whole house built on my own terms, a life I'd replanted with my own 2 hands, I was. I opened it slowly.
El.
I know you. I know you're stubborn and quiet, and so full of fire that you scare yourself sometimes. I also know that if you're reading this, you're probably standing in a house that feels empty and wondering if you matter anymore. You do. You always have. People will forget your softness because it doesn't shout. They'll underestimate you because you're kind. They'll assume that silence means surrender. But I built this cabin with you because I knew the truth. You don't disappear. You endure. And one day, when no one sees it coming, you bloom. Don't forget that. Not even when they try to make you. Love always. Asterisk. My breath hitched in my chest. I folded the letter back up with shaking hands and placed it beside the photo on the table.
He'd seen it.
Before Claire. Before the silencing. Before the guest room and the folded towels and the empty looks. He had known who I was. And now?
So did I.
Sophie came the following Saturday. This time without Claire. She said she needed a weekend to think, she said with a shrug. So, Dad brought me. Thomas had gone into town for groceries, and I had Sophie all to myself for the afternoon. We baked shortbread cookies, dug up weeds near the shed, and started a bird log. What kind of birds live out here? She asked, eyes wide, pencil ready. Too many to list, I said. But we'll start with the ones that come back. She nodded like it was a life lesson. Later, I pulled out an old shoebox and handed it to her. Inside were letters.
Dozens of them.
All the ones I'd written her over the last few months. Notes about the land, stories from when her father was little. Little life lessons folded between press leaves and tiny photos. She opened the top one, read silently, then looked up. These are all for me? Every last one.
She grinned.
That means you're the only grandma in the world who sends love letters like a spy. I laughed. If you ever feel lost, I told her, just open one. That night, after Thomas tucked her into the guest cot near the fireplace, he sat beside me on the porch. She asked if she can come every other weekend, he said. And he smiled. I told her this was your place, not mine. That you'd say yes or no, not me. I nodded. She can come. He looked down, rubbing the back of his neck. She misses Claire. But I think she understands more than we know.
She's smart, I said.
And she listens with more than her ears. He was quiet for a long time. I don't know what happens next, he said finally. With Claire. With the house. With any of it. You don't need to, I replied. You just need to remember who you are when no one's telling you.
He blinked.
You sound like Dad. No, I said softly. I sound like me. After he left, I stayed on the porch alone, blanket around my shoulders. The trees rustled, but the wind had softened. A few stars had started to emerge above the ridge. The rosemary by the steps smelled strongest at night. I closed my eyes and breathed. They tried to take everything from me, my space, my voice, my legacy. But I hadn't fought with fists or fury. I had fought by standing still, by building, by waiting, by refusing to be erased. And somehow, without meaning to, I had written the greatest revenge story of all. Not with shouting, not with shame, but with peace. Spring rolled in quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, but full, like a long exhale after holding your breath too long. The rosemary bloomed. The lavender took root. The porch creaked a little louder in the mornings, like it, too, had found its voice again.
And me?
I had stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. Because I finally understood something. Peace isn't what happens when the noise dies down. Peace is what you build while the world tries to talk over you. Sophie had made a habit of calling every Sunday now. She'd send little updates. How her math test went, the spider she found in her closet and didn't kill, how her dad burned the grilled cheese but still made her eat it. Her voice was lighter, freer. Sometimes I could hear Claire in the background, soft, unobtrusive. Not the woman who used to fill silences with control, but someone learning, maybe for the first time, to sit still with herself. The tension in their household hadn't vanished, but it had shifted. The storm had passed. And in its wake, something new was trying to grow. Whether or not Claire was ready for it, that wasn't my burden to carry anymore. One evening, as I walked along the edge of the ridge, I saw something that made me stop mid-step. A man, early 30s, khakis, polo shirt, clipboard in hand. Not from the county. Not from the community. From them. I didn't approach. Just watched. He stood near the birch tree, measuring distance between a few survey flags I had torn up weeks ago. He hadn't noticed me yet. I called out, "Lose something?" He startled, actually flinched, then turned, professional smile already forming.
Ah, Miss Shaw.
Didn't expect. No, I said, you didn't. I crossed the distance slowly, letting each step press into the earth like punctuation. You're on private land. I'm with Carson and Howe, he said, tapping the logo on his clipboard. We were contracted by Langley and Ward. You're trespassing. He shifted. Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're just gathering preliminary data in case the covenant. The covenant is permanent.
His voice tightened.
Nothing's ever truly permanent, ma'am. I stepped closer. I buried my husband's ashes under that birch tree. I said, calm and cold. You want to explain your flag placement to him? He paled. I'm just doing my job. Then you've picked the wrong ground. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a laminated copy of the preservation order, the county seal gleaming in the corner. Take a photo, I said. Then take your clipboard and go. He didn't argue.
Didn't speak.
He left the way they always do, fast and quiet, like someone who just remembered the forest as teeth. I called Cynthia that night. They're still coming, I told her. She sighed. They're trying to exhaust you, hoping age will work faster than their legal team. I looked out the window. Then they've forgotten who they're dealing with. She chuckled. I'll file a cease and desist. Again. And this time, I'm naming Claire's firm directly. No, I said. Not yet. She hesitated. You sure?
Yes.
Let them send their people. Let them trespass. Every visit is another nail in the coffin of their credibility. You're playing the long game. No, I said, sipping my tea. I'm just outlasting the short one. A week later, Sophie arrived again. This time, she came with a shoebox full of seeds and a sketchbook. I'm designing a garden, she said proudly, flipping through pages of colored pencil drawings. You know, like yours, but with a pond. A pond? Just a small one. With frogs. Well, I said, as long as the frogs don't ask to move in, I think we're okay. She giggled. She stayed the weekend. We planted marigolds, painted birdhouses, and made sun tea that turned out so strong we had to water it down twice. She told me things Claire didn't know. About school. About how she was writing her own story now. It's about a girl who lives in a treehouse and builds a pulley system so no one can come up unless they're invited. I smiled. Sounds familiar. I might base the grandma on you, she added shyly. Then you better make her fierce, I said. Oh, she is. Before she left, she placed a new page on the fridge. A drawing of the cabin. Underneath, in careful block letters, she'd written, "This is where the strong women live." I stared at it long after she was gone. She didn't know about the surveyors, the flags, the latest whispers Claire had sent through back channels. But somehow, she'd drawn the perfect line in the sand. This wasn't just my house anymore. It was a landmark, a lesson, a warning. A few days later, Claire called. No pleasantries. I heard about the man you chased off your property. Good. Then, I don't have to explain it. She exhaled. I didn't send him, but someone did. Through your firm. Silence. I told them to drop it, she said eventually. After your letter burned on my desk and Sophie came home with soil under her fingernails. I waited. I didn't want to lose, she added. You already did, I replied. But not to me. She was quiet. Do you want me to say I'm sorry? She asked. No, I said. I want you to learn. And if I don't, I stared at the painting Sophie left behind, the one with the words she'd written in crayon. This is where the strong women live. Then this is where the story ends, I said softly. She hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I went outside, knelt in the soil, and planted new peonies. Right by the front steps. Right where everyone could see them bloom. Because some people make noise. Some people make demands. And some people, like me, we build homes so grounded in truth that not even a bulldozer can shake the walls. This house? It wasn't just shelter. It was a story. And I was finally writing the ending on my own terms. The rosemary had spread. It now reached past the edge of the path, brushing ankles and hemlines like a quiet welcome or a gentle warning, depending on who walked through. Spring had melted into early summer, and the land around me hummed with quiet activity. Birds stitched their way through the trees. The bees returned, fat and lazy. The lake shimmered like polished glass. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the next chapter. I was living in it. The letters kept coming. Not from lawyers anymore, but from readers. Women mostly. Some older. Some younger. Some in between. They'd found my address from an old author's bio tucked in the back of my third book, the one about a quiet fox who builds a home out of other creatures' discarded treasures. I used to read your stories to my daughter, one letter said. I didn't know you were real, said another. And then this one, from a woman named Joyce. Asterisk, you don't know me, but I saw the story in the county journal. The one about the woman who protected her land. The developer they named was the same one who tried to rezone our community center 3 years ago. We didn't fight hard enough. But now we will. Asterisk. I folded her letter and added it to the corkboard beside Sophie's drawing.
Funny, isn't it?
They thought this cabin was small. Turns out it was louder than all of them. One Friday morning, Sophie arrived with Thomas trailing behind, arms full of bags. She was all knees and elbows now, taller than last time, but still with that quiet, fiery sparkle that reminded me so much of Malcolm. She wore a t-shirt that read, "I grow things you can't kill." I pointed to it and laughed. That's a threat and a promise. She grinned. We're building the pond today. The Frog Palace? Exactly. Thomas followed her in, carrying snacks and lemonade. She hasn't stopped talking about it for a week. And you? I asked. He smiled. I could use a project. We spent the day digging, shaping, laying rocks. Sophie picked each one with care, explaining how the frogs would need shade in summer and space to hide from raccoons. Thomas worked beside me, sweat on his brow, dirt under his nails, no trace of the corporate exhaustion I once saw carved into the lines of his face. During a break, he sat on the porch and looked out across the land. "You saved us, you know," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Not just yourself," he added.
Me. Sophie.
Even Claire. I didn't answer. I let the wind carry that truth wherever it needed to land. He continued. "When you left, I thought you were giving up, but you were reclaiming. And it made me realize how much we'd asked you to shrink." "You didn't ask," I said softly. "You just didn't stop it." He winced but nodded. "That's why I brought this," he said, reaching into his bag and pulling out a worn hardcover book, The Whisper Fox, my first. I found it while clearing out the attic. I'd forgotten how much I loved this story. He opened the inside cover. There, in Malcolm's handwriting, was a message. To our Thomas. If ever you forget where you come from, look for the fox. Love. Mom and Dad. He stared at it for a long time, then closed the book and said, "We want to come here more often."
Not just Sophie and me.
Claire too, if she gets there. Gets where? To whatever this is, he said, gesturing around the porch, the garden, the land. A life that doesn't need performance. I nodded. Then she'll have to come as herself, not a guest. And not a scout for developers. He laughed.
Deal.
That night, after they left, I sat by the new pond and watched the moonlight dance across the water. The frogs hadn't arrived yet, but the silence was already full of promise. I lit a single candle in the kitchen, just like I used to when Malcolm was alive. Just like I had on the hard nights. The lonely nights. The nights when no one thanked me for the clean towels or the warm soup. But tonight, I lit it for someone else.
Me.
The next day, I received a final envelope from Langley and Ward. Not a threat. Not a loophole. A letter.
Typed.
Formal. Cold but definitive. Miss Shaw. We hereby confirm that all further development inquiries related to your property have been permanently withdrawn. Your legal standing is undisputed, and no additional contact will be initiated from our firm or its affiliates. Respectfully, Langley and Ward LLP. They'd surrendered, not because they wanted to, but because they couldn't deny the truth anymore.
I didn't just own this land.
I embodied it. I framed that letter, hung it above the fireplace, not as a trophy, but as a line drawn in stone. Months passed. The peonies bloomed again. Sophie's pond filled with rainwater and, eventually, 2 frogs. Thomas started sketching again. Claire, I heard, had started therapy. She hadn't returned yet, but her silence no longer sounded like strategy. It sounded like work. I wished her well. I didn't need an apology. I had my garden. I had my porch. I had my breath back. Sometimes I still sit in the rocking chair and think about the day she told me, "You don't get a say." She said it so simply, so casually, as if I'd already disappeared. But I hadn't. I was just beginning. And now they say my name when they talk about land that can't be bought. Now they point to my porch when they tell their daughters what it means to stand firm. Now, they call me stubborn like it's a compliment. Because it is. Because I was never just a guest in their house. I was the foundation they forgot to respect. Now I've built something they can't move, can't measure, and can't monetize. A home that doesn't need to shout to be powerful. A life that doesn't bend to fit someone else's floor plan. A story that doesn't end when someone else says it should. And if that's not legacy, then I don't need one. Thank you for joining me on Eleanor's journey. If her story reminded you of someone or of yourself, share it in the comments. Subscribe for more stories of quiet strength, bold reclamations, and lives rewritten. Your voice matters.